Hello, everybody. Welcome to LVLing Up Live, where I have the immense pleasure of interviewing a stellar project or program manager. And I've got a great one for you today. I know I say that every week, but I definitely have a great one for you today. This is Famid Khondaker, and he has oodles of experience in project and program management. And I'm very, very excited to hear all about you, Fahmid. But nothing from me. What about you? Introduce to everybody.
Thanks for that, Jasmine. So my background actually interesting. I started my career off as an engineer and I worked in that space for a few years and it was quite a lot of fun. But what I found as an engineer is all the decisions are made for you and it's so far in the process that you get to make your mark and make your difference. So let's say we're building a bridge. As an engineer, the decisions are all made. Yep, we're building this bridge. We're building it here. It's going to get you from this side of Brisbane to the other side of Brisbane. And that's how it sort of operates. As opposed to the questions that I find more interesting is, should we even build a bridge? Should we have a city cat? Should we actually not even bother with the bridge? That's the more interesting question to me. And I always found that's where I was drawn to throughout my entire career. So what that meant for me is I left my engineering career and then I moved into the world of projects through consultancy firms. And that's where I am now.
Brilliant. I love that. I've never thought about that when looking at a bridge. You've changed my world just now in one sentence. But I mean, speaking on behalf of the project management community, we're grateful to have you. Sorry, engineering, you're ours. All right, so let's kick off, I suppose, with my first question. You've been doing projects for a while. As you mentioned, you've been with some consultancies, but I'd love to hear about a memorable project that you've done in the past.
So the biggest and most exciting project for me was actually at Uniting Care. So I was there for about 2 years. And so what happened was, it was actually interesting how I got the job. So I was at Queensland Treasury before that, and then COVID hit and I just became a dad. And then Queensland government decided to do some belt tightening on contractors and decided to get rid of everyone. I was trying to get into a building and then couldn't get into the building anymore.
That's how you found out?
That's how we found out. And then I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I'm just about to have a baby. How are we going to survive? And then luckily a friend of mine that I worked with Treasury, she started at Uniting Care and said, Fahmid, do you want to come start at Uniting Care? I had no idea. I was just like, yep, I'll take it. I've got a whole family here, wife's on maternity leave, all of that. So the project was quite interesting, actually. It started there where basically there's the aged care area of the business. They have multiple arms. The aged care area of the business was struggling with their scheduling and rostering of client visits. So rostering staff shifts and scheduling client visits. And they were, I suppose, doing that in a very different way, depending on where you are in the state. So if you go to Cairns and you are scheduling someone, you might do it a different way to if you're in Brisbane, you might do that. So my project was make everything the same and save some money for the organization. So that's sort of what the brief I got. That's probably one of the most exciting projects because it started off very much as a very high level statement, and then we could take the direction where we needed to go. So the outcome was set for us, and that I can talk a lot more about it, but you tell me where to stop.
Well, my next question is what went well and what didn't. Sure. But before we get to that question, I think it's very interesting what you say about, different teams, even in the same department, doing things differently. I think every single project I start almost has that exact same sentence. Yes. Standardized, let's get economies of scale, let's get efficiency. And I suppose that's digital transformation, to a T. And what's really cool about those kind of projects is you find what's best practice at those different sites and you can kind of make it into this super best practice. So that does sound very exciting. I'm curious to know though, what went well and what didn't.
Sure. So I think as a project manager, you come in and before the project manager's usually there's what I'd call pre-scoping of the project. Like someone's got the idea and someone's roughly put a budget together and done that. And what I walked into was going, oh my God, it's like we're trying to drive from Brisbane to Sydney with 3 liters of fuel. Like that's what it feels like, the equivalent.
And no map.
And no map. Yeah, exactly. And like maybe on a bicycle too. And it's also, where do I put the fuel? On a bicycle, right? So that's what it felt like, came into that initial scope. And then from there, what I think worked really well was the sponsor on the project. I really got to meet him and tell him, like, look, either I'm here to deliver an outcome or I'm not. Like, these are the constraints that we have to work within. And we set it out together to really go on this journey to solve this. And I think that was probably the best thing we did together, because that set the direction for us working as a team to go back to, the finance and the budgets and all those other areas of the business, and almost work together to go, this is your business unit. I'm helping you deliver that outcome. But look, if you don't get enough funding to do this, it's game over before we've started. So like having those really honest conversations right at the front and working with that sponsor was probably what went really well. The other thing that I'd say is, as a project manager, don't be afraid to pause and stop. So actually did that. So we started this in about June. For the first 3 months, I was just spinning wheels because the scope was quite high level. It was, standardize the process, but don't do any technology changes. And I'm going, oh, okay, this is going to be hard, but let's have a crack.
Bicycle fuel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so it started off pretty much like that. And, we had these high level process maps of, well, if they just do it in Cairns this way, make everyone do it the Cairns way or something like that. But as you know, as an experienced, project manager, like from a change perspective, no one's going to buy that. Everyone's going to go, if you're not improving my life, I'm not changing my process. That's
away.
Yeah, pretty much. That's it, right? So that's where I really sat with the sponsor and I said, look, I know technology was out of scope. We have to bring it in scope and we have to do these particular changes. And then that will give us the efficiencies. And then that way, when we roll out to everyone to do the same thing, we're actually giving them time back in their day and, resolve a lot of the like systematic issues that are there. So again, that pausing and thinking. So the project scope was really get rostering the same way, get scheduling the same way. And like it was a couple other really minor things, but that was it. But we paused altogether and we said, actually, this is no longer a process improvement project. This is an operating model project. So what that means is, what is your current operating model? How do you operate? We had to map that across the entire state and understand these people. So what was interesting is like really, really fundamental things popped out when we did that heat map exercise. So as an example, if a carer is sick and they have to go see a client, usually what happens is, as part of Uniting Care's Blue Care process, is they'll call that client and tell them, hey, sorry, this person was going to come visit you today, but they're not going to come visit you anymore. Now, that usually happens from the scheduling and rostering team. They're the ones who make that phone call. What was interesting is I went so in depth into the current state operating model, and it's so important. So I went, what technology do they have? What processes do they follow? What people are there? And when I went into the technology, I was talking about what hardware do they have? What software do they have? And so I meant like, do they have 2 screens? Do they have a telephone on their desk? And we got to Rockhampton and we found out there's no telephones, but everyone else across the state has telephones. We get to Toowoomba and we find out there's no telephones. So then we're asking them, how are you telling your clients?
Regional Queensland, they need telephones too.
They do, but I mean, like for the schedulers, like they didn't have telephones. So then the question of the process comes up and says, how are you telling people that they're not going to be there for their visit for the day? And everyone's like, we normally find a way to email the nurses who then call, and then the nurses tell them, and half the time the messages never go through. And so it's this like that really important piece of really going into the detail is such an important piece. And I think that what went really well, because that helped us understand what is the current operating model. Okay, so we've got technology, hardware uplift needed, technology, software uplift needed. We need, licensing for certain people who, like in Brisbane, we had some, it's like people are driving cars, and again, people are on bicycles over there in certain regions and expected to do the same output and outcomes. So based on that current state understanding, what we ended up doing is we said, okay, if we had, a genie and we could ask for wishes, how would we move forward, right? And so what we did is we built out, what does our target look like? And so we said, okay, everyone has a monitor with 2 screens. So they have the scheduling software on one, they have the rostering on the other, they've got a desk phone. So we brought everything into scope and basically said, we just have to fix it all. Otherwise, there is no way we can roll out, the same way of working across the state. You can't expect that. So that's what I'd say went really well, is sitting with that sponsor together and going, how are you going to measure your performance of your Cairns team versus your Brisbane team if you're not giving them the same tools, right?
Yeah,
And so
it's slightly unfair.
slightly unfair, right? Yeah. So we
I
did
love
that.
that.
Yeah.
Before you said what maybe could have been improved, I just want to just extract the two very vital lessons in what you just said. So the first one, first and foremost, if you are a project sponsor watching this recording right now, please don't underestimate the value that you bring.
For sure.
I can, correlation is not causation, but I can say hand on heart, the most successful projects that I've done have been with a very effective, hyper-aligned project sponsor that you absolutely work in sync with as a team, which I think is exactly the situation you had. The other nugget of gold that you gave us, Fahmid, was it's okay to take one step back to jump 10 steps forward in a project.
Exactly.
I think particularly if you're like even external PM coming into an organization, there's such a focus on velocity. Are we getting value for money? Are you moving forward with the schedule? That a pause can be a little bit controversial sometimes. But again, if you're a project sponsor, welcome the pause. You will get a better outcome in the end.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly it.
They were beautiful tips. All right. What could have been improved?
Sure. So with the change of scope, I guess what's really important is, again, working really closely with your program manager and, the other people, I suppose, the portfolio office. And so I was working with the 2030 transformation office there. And I think what's really important there is the finances play into a huge component to projects like this. So for me, I've always managed to stay within the original spending budget and still deliver that new outcome, which is this, future operating model and new way of working. But the place where I made a mistake actually was I always thought my parameters are cost, scope, and time, right? And so you go, if I'm dealing with cost and if someone says you're spending $2 million and I'm going, I spent $2 million, I've spent 1.8, nobody's going to be upset. But actually, people will be upset if you don't spend it in the right financial year. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Okay.
So it's always important to figure out, okay, when was the spend happening in which financial year? And then figure out, okay, so if I'm extending the time, but I'm still keeping the cost the same, I thought, and I agreed that with the sponsor, everyone's okay. But actually, the people from the budget office providing that funding pay special attention to when that they had allocated it, because they're making next year's investment decisions knowing that money is spent. You can't magically go back and say, and so it caused a lot of issues, got there in the end, but that was a big lesson learned for myself, for sure.
Fantastic. I've never thought about that, but that makes sense. And I'm reflecting back when you have finance people going, when is the spend landing? Now I know why. And there are things you can do, particularly if you are purchasing things like hardware or, software, you can pull that into a financial year if you have to. So that's a brilliant tip. My next question was going to be of what you learnt. What have you taken into other projects? I'm guessing that's one of them.
Yeah, that's definitely it. I think you touched on it earlier. So the role of the sponsor and partnering with the project is so important. And I think that in itself is not something that is necessarily always taught to people that get the responsibility of being a sponsor.
Yes.
So I would say that's something that I would really encourage, organizations to really invest in their people and, understand the right questions that they should be asking. Like, I worked really well with the sponsor, but I definitely felt pressure at times. I definitely felt like we're friends at times. And, that there was a really healthy relationship that needed to happen. And I think that in itself is a really important lesson. So I normally now, before I come into a new project, my first few questions are always around the sponsor, like how is this sponsored? Where is this, sitting in the portfolio? Where is it structured? And you can almost tell if the project is going to be successful before it's even started. And there's enough there. Yeah. Because if you can see, so if I give you an example of like a mining client, right? And so they will have, like, I'm just making it up, but like, let's pick Rio Tinto as an example. They'll have coal, they'll have iron ore, they'll have all these different business units, and they operate quite literally as separate, group executives with separate businesses.
Mhm.
Now you get this big IT project that comes along and says, we're going to do payroll the same way across the entire business. Cool, exciting. But
Good
then
luck.
good luck. But now you have to start asking questions about the sponsor. Who's actually sponsoring me on this, and like, what role do they have in the organization?
Mm.
Because what will start to happen is you're going to start changing things in people's businesses to make it suit your process across the entire organization. And now if you are aligned to a sponsor that doesn't have the ability to influence in that way, you can already tell, like, this is going to be a pushing uphill project, and before you've
Yes.
even started, right? So I think that sponsor role is so important, and understanding their sphere and whether they've got full control of their sphere. And if they've got that full control, sign up to that project and go, we're partnering, let's do it.
Mhm.
If it's not, I would advise that project manager to run in the opposite direction and go, like, hey, hang on a second, it's heading down a bad direction, and maybe, work through that piece and go, okay, how do we
Mhm.
resolve the sponsoring piece all the way through? I wouldn't actually say right, but yes, you know what I mean.
That is such sage advice. And I'm reflecting back to projects I've seen that fail, and like a
Yeah,
crazy amount of number like of projects
yeah,
do fail. And I wonder if it does come down to that sponsorship level. And yeah, I'm just, yes, I can agree based
exactly.
on
Yeah,
my
yeah,
experience. Yeah, that's
yeah.
what happens. And often not for any lack of trying, but yeah, as you
No,
say, it could be where they are in the organization, or
yeah,
their day job is just very hard.
exactly.
And they just don't have the time to focus on this project that they've been, handballed potentially. You see that
For
happen
sure.
quite a lot as well. So that is brilliant advice.
No,
Thank you.
no, no, no worries.
Speaking of advice, I end every one of these
Sure,
webinars with asking the interviewee 3 tips that they have for how to be an awesome project or program management. What
sure.
have you got for us, Fahmid?
All right. The first one is, it's a values piece of advice. And I think as a project manager, it's really important to stay till the end. Like, stay till the rubber hits the road. Like, if you are let's say, at a restaurant and you're ordering a burger, how would you feel if your chef leaves in the middle of your burger and
Mhm.
then you get chips and you go, I didn't order that. I actually ordered a burger and chips, and then the burger doesn't turn up, all of that. Like, it's that same thing in the project. The business has paid for an outcome. And while the market might be hot and you might be getting better offers and this and that, and you can leave midway through, I do think, you've committed to an outcome, stay till the outcome. That's a really important piece that I
Mm.
think is important to keep in mind. So that's one of my first tips.
I
Um,
like that. That reminds me of when you're at the football or any sport and your team's losing and people leave.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
always like, you gotta
yeah,
stay and cheer them
yeah,
on.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I think in project management, it disappoints me a little bit in the sense of the profession is such that people stay for a portion. And maybe it is reasonable to stay, but I've seen a lot of times where people leave before rubber hits the road, and they've done that strategically. So I would say I advise against doing that, because ultimately your reputation is what gets you your next contract. It's how you continually win work. And so if you have those strong values, that will make a huge difference to your future career.
Absolutely.
And
Earlier this year, I had the opposite happen where I had a project going, stop working, Jasmine. You are 38 weeks pregnant.
yeah,
Start working. I was like, I just want to stay. Anyway, sorry,
love
tip
it.
number 2.
Love it. So the next one is fear of control. So this is around you as a project manager or a program manager are suddenly a leader. So you've got BAs, change managers, you've got coordinators, you've got controllers, you've got risk people, you've got all these people reporting into you, and you're controlling this outcome. So this is your sphere of control, and it's real. While there might be other noise in other areas of the business, don't let that noise impact your world. The whole world, I think, is made up. Like, borders are made up. Look at Europe. Like, you go from one and suddenly it's another country. Like, project management in the same sense, like, your control is your control. So you're paid for an outcome usually to solve a problem for a client. And I think in that way, for your team, make it an enjoyable experience. If your team can see, if you can see it's a beautiful day and you can go, actually, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, go out for a walk. Let them go out for a walk. It's actually amazing, because what that means is before testing and like those really tough times where you have to do like the 15-hour days and all of that, they are the first ones there going, oh, I remember they gave me heaps of time off. They're ready to help you, and you work as this cohesive unit. So I think it's all, swings and roundabouts is the term. So really make it fun, make it enjoyable, make up the rules. Who cares? You'll enjoy it, and that's what you'll remember mostly, I think.
That, because it can be really intense. And I take for granted how intense it can be sometimes. I often have new people join my team who are wonderful, but they go, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on here. So yeah, I think don't underestimate the value of a walking meeting, or some time outside, or go out for lunch, because you'll get a better outcome in the end. I'm loving this. This is very zen. This is the theme of today. I like this.
No worries, Jasmine. I'm glad it is. And then the last tip I had, this is more project management focus. It's quite detailed. So I always think of GST, like when the tax, but then I replace the G with the C. So I call it CST in my head. So everything is cost, scope, time. That's what it is. Ooh. And in my head, so if anyone has asked me to do anything, so let's say someone says, hey, can you do this piece of work for me? In my head, I always respond back with, okay, cost-wise, fine. Scope, okay, this is what you need. When do you need it by? Time. So if I don't have any of those parameters, I always ask more questions back before I even let any simple conversation end. So all the time in the back of my head is cost, scope, time, cost, scope, time, cost, scope, time. Because you'll find that will solve 90% of your communication issues.
Yeah, so practical.
So just continually just keep that in mind. Yeah, that's an easy one to do. And so that applies to anyone in the project, whether you're a business analyst, change manager, coordinator, anything. In the back of your head, if let's say I'm a project manager and I've asked you to do something, let's say I asked a coordinator in my team, they should be thinking, all right, how much other work do I have? Can I fit it in? When does Fahmid need this by? If I don't give a date, sometimes I'm lazy in my messaging, hey, can you please do this? And they need to ask me, they need to manage upwards as much as I manage downwards. It's a two-way street. And I think that's what my third piece of advice would be: cost, scope, time, and two-way street.
Oh, I love that. I want to print that out and stick them up as posters in my office. That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your project experience, for giving us all of those tips and all those nuggets of gold throughout. I have learned so much. That's why I love these. I really appreciate your time. And if you have, a final shout out, of course, Fahmid does project work. So if you want to connect with Fahmid, of course, I'm sure we'll have your details linked below here. But yes, please, thank you so much for being on the LVLing Up live vodcast today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you next time. Bye.